our August segment of this 35th anniversary webinar that Pinelands Preservation Alliance has been putting on. Can you advance to the next slide, Mike?
I'm trying. There we go. Is that right?
So,
Do you see it?
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So this month and back in June, we've been talking about climate change. It's too big of a topic to fit into a single webinar, so that's why we've divided it up. But I'll give a little recap first of what our last webinar went over, and then I'll hand it over to Mike to talk about mitigation and adaptation. So next slide. A recap next. So South Jersey has been shaped by the climate. It's been changing throughout our geologic history, and past changes in the climate have repeatedly submerged our region under the ocean, laying down layers of sediment that form the Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer that we know of today, and created the unique ecology that makes the Pinelands so special. Next. However, the current rate of climate change is unprecedented. We do have a comparable extinction event to compare today's climate to. That happened 56 million years ago. It was called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. So during that course of time, the Earth warmed up. Many animals went extinct, but that rate of change was occurring 10 times slower than the climate change that we are experiencing today. So although it is comparable in some ways, what is happening on our planet today is quite unprecedented. Next. So we know that some impacts are happening to pineland species because they're vulnerable. They have this very unique dependency on the pinelands ecosystem. And we know that pine barrens tree frog and Atlantic white cedars are both vulnerable to sea level rise, changing seasons. All of these things are putting iconic pineland species at risk. But we need more research to be able to find out what the current status is and what the future projections are for the pinelands. Next. However, although we know we need more research, studying a changing climate is like trying to hit a moving target, and it will have already changed by the time that we feel we fully understand the system. So we know that we have enough information now to take action, and we need to make changes right now. So that's what today's webinar is all about. Next slide. And you can see the recap, the recording of that whole climate change webinar on our YouTube channel. Next. And now I'll hand it off to my colleague, Mike Klein, both JD and PhD. He's our Director of Government Relations. He's been with us since last year. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Heidi. The beautiful slides, I attribute all to Heidi's expertise and artistic abilities. I'm here with my brother, the Jersey Devil, here in our beautiful carriage house at the Bishop Farmstead. Please come visit us when you can. There's a beautiful new landscaping that our wonderful colleagues have done. So I am no scientist. I am policy guy, government relations guy. So I hope I can focus on what we as advocates are doing here at PPA, and we'll get into more of the politics and the policies at the federal and state levels, and hopefully by the end of the webinar, giving some comfort and ideas for those of you watching about what you all can do. So what is the current state of the climate? This is a brand new report. The Rutgers has got a fantastic Climate Change Resource Center. This report just came out this last month or so. Let me ask Heidi or Rachel behind the scenes here, are these slides going to be available to our viewers?
The recording of the presentation, and then we'll do a follow-up email that has links for anything that we've recommended along the way.
Yeah, that's sort of my question. So this is a great report. They've got an infographic that we have just basically stolen. And what you can see here, there's 3 big points I want to make about the current state of our climate here in New Jersey. That's what's so great about the report. It's specific to our state. And you can just see how the average temperature has risen. A lot of the projections we're going to talk about today are through the year 2100. That's why that middle one is so important. And that's with moderate greenhouse gas emissions. And we can talk about what moderate means with some of the mitigation policies that the federal and state governments have tried to put in place to try to keep that temperature rise from getting even higher. New Jersey is pretty distinctive in its coastline. Our sea level rise is even higher than some of our surrounding states, but you can see the scary statistic of 2.2 inches per decade since the year 1980. And we're going to talk later about what it's going to look like in the year 2100 and what the state is trying to do from a policy perspective to address that. And there's a highlight of what sea level rise is going to look like by the year 2050. We're all concerned here in the Pinelands with the incredibly dry periods we've had through droughts, the wildfires that you've heard about in the news that have affected our ecosystem and the pines. 798 wildfires, almost 5,000 acres just last fall. So here we go. For the outline of today, we're going to talk about mitigation. How do we keep it from getting worse? Adaptation. How do we adapt ourselves to try to live with the change? And shameless plugs for our work here at PPA. And again, with a connection to what I hope you all can do. This was we workshopped this a little bit with the staff here and with Heidi's idea of what to try to give some visualizations, mitigation versus adaptation. You can either fix the roof or you could live in the house and move your furniture around and live with an umbrella over your head. So we're going to first talk about mitigation and how do we try to stop climate change from getting worse from where it is. The key to that is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And again, my thanks to Heidi for making these slides beautiful and interactive. We've got the next 2 slides to give you an idea of, or next several slides, what the emissions look like, what is the science behind what's in the air and what makes it so dangerous. It's the carbon dioxide. 80% of these greenhouse gas emissions, all these are very unhealthy gases to be up in the air, but you can see the biggest slice of the pie is carbon dioxide, with very helpful virtual Post-it notes that I did not know existed 2 weeks ago. The next 2 slides try to compare what's happening nationally and in New Jersey. You'll see the numbers are fairly similar. The biggest emitter or source of greenhouse gas emissions is transportation. You might be surprised at the percentage that comes from buildings itself, from energy. You can see that 28% or so is transportation is pretty similar nationally and here in New Jersey. We'll talk about what we can do to try to keep emissions happening from buildings in a few slides from now. I'm hitting the down button and nothing is happening. So state policy guy, trying to talk about what the current gubernatorial administration, Governor Phil Murphy and his team, they are in the last year of their administration, what he's been trying to do together, either through executive orders or together with the legislature, 100% clean energy by the year 2035. Like trying to electrify buildings with 0 carbon emissions through heating and cooling, again, through an executive order. And you can see the estimates of the number of homes, commercial buildings, and how to help low to moderate income households reach that goal as well. So how do we get to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And through state policies, we have to look at the grid. Power gets generated either from nuclear power plants, from natural gas resources, solar or wind. It gets transmitted to the big transmission lines that you see, the distribution lines that come to your house, and ta-da, you are the customer. We share our electricity from these generation plants with several other states. You might be surprised at how many states we are part of regionally. But first, another helpful analogy, I hope, again from Heidi's imaginative brain, the idea that our regional transmission organization is sort of like ride sharing. You don't own the equipment. They get to set the price. And that last point is really important. During peak energy times, think about 100-degree days, middle of the day, everyone's got their air conditioning going. Price surging is just like rush hour trying to get a ride share. And our electricity costs are up 23 to 40% over the last 5 years because, well, I don't want to say because, but here's where we get this is our grid, PJM. I would prefer it to be PBJ, but it is not. But PJM comes from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, from the original name of this regional power supplier. It's now across these 13 states plus the District of Columbia. And I'm guessing you've all seen your electricity rates go up over the last 5 years and even more dramatically quite recently. There are some reasons for that. Russia's war with Ukraine starting in 2022 really restricted natural gas flows for sure. We could have a whole separate webinar about data centers and their need for electricity and how that is driving up prices. And we've got an aging infrastructure and a slow uptake on renewable energies like wind and solar, which are really keeping a focus on the use of fossil fuels, which is arguably keeping prices high. So
yeah, if I could go back to that Uber analogy.
Please do.
So it's as if the fleet of cars has remained mostly the same, but now Europe is also asking for rides and data centers are also asking for rides. So there are these unforeseen extra customers who are now causing the surge pricing for us here in America, differently from the energy demand that we had planned for. But also, we had also planned for faster incorporation of these renewables, even though they are the fastest power that you can bring online, the wind and the solar. But PJM has kind of caused a bottleneck. Okay, that's it.
Okay, let me try to get back to where we were. So, it takes about 5 years to get new connections. So with less, as Heidi just said, with less power, there's price surging. There's been this slow approval of renewable projects. Again, we could have a whole new webinar on the PJM grid, the policies behind it, its governance, which has become an in the weeds issue. So Governor Murphy got into the weeds. He just signed a couple of laws that got through the legislature in the last several months to try to get New Jersey's voice a little stronger and a little bit more oversight from the state. But that, again, it gets kind of complicated, but just it's the nature of the grid that it is a contributor to the price of energy. So here
we have a couple of other webinars to recommend that we can send in that follow-up email that helped made it much more understandable.
Thanks, Heidi. So we've got you can see the pieces of the pie back in 1989 of what made up our energy. It's you can see that big slice for coal, which I believe was 20%-ish, nuclear, natural gas, And as we go to the current state of our sources of energy, you can see coal really has disappeared. I think it's less than 1% now, and a very large increase in natural gas, and nuclear having even slightly more now than we had in 1989. And you can see where we want to go in the next 25 years to try to change that and get a much more of an emphasis on renewable energy. Solar and wind are the two greatest sources of renewable energy. This was projected by the governor's office going back 6 years ago, and this would really help reach that goal of, I guess it's worth mentioning, by 2050, when the current 100% clean energy goal is 2035. The governor's office actually accelerated that goal. It originally was 2050, and now it's 2035. You can see from this slide how we in New Jersey are really hoping to expand our source of energy from both solar and from wind. And that, as the slide says, we have these pretty ambitious statewide goals that are now clashing with the current federal policies, most dramatically with regard to wind energy. Literally the first day of the Trump administration, there's an executive order that put a stop, a freeze on all new permits for offshore wind. And there were at least three projects underway and another that was pretty close to being underway off the coastline of New Jersey that had been approved, and those approvals have now been withdrawn. So wind energy has really, I will be forced to use a pun and say that it has some winds. It has some winds in its, not at its back, but in its face. So if wind is being curtailed, how do we try to expand solar? There were several incentives in, we'll talk about this in a little bit. There were federal incentives to try to expand the use of solar energy, and those are there's again, an intentional pun. There's a sunset on those incentives. They were tax incentives for consumers, and I'm afraid that those are use it or lose it largely by the end of this calendar year. So here in the Pinelands, to tout our advocacy, our successes, and unfortunately, sometimes we don't win them all, really with a focus on natural gas pipelines. Natural gas has been seen as a bridge to a cleaner future. It's not the final destination that we want. Natural gas pipelines tend to leach a lot of methane gas, which is very even more dangerous than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So we've been fighting the overbuilding of infrastructure that would try to put natural gas pipelines right through the Pinelands, through the forests of the Pinelands. Our biggest victory, very much predating my time here, but I'll help take credit for it, through the really great work of my colleagues, the South Jersey Gas Pipeline. It was proposed in 2013. It was going to supply gas to the B.L. England plant, and through that's a photo, I believe, of the actual Pinelands Commission meeting where the pipeline was being considered. And we led protests. We led a legal fight against it, and it was finally canceled in 2019. Not such great success with the New Jersey Natural Gas 30-inch pipeline that was proposed in 2015. You can see where it was going to go. Started building in 2018 despite our legal challenges. It's called the Southern Reliability Link, and as our little post-it note says, even if we lose some, it's still it's worth the fight. I think this goes for all kinds of development in the Pinelands. Developers should know they're going to face some resistance and advocacy on behalf of the Pinelands from our office and from our really terrific allies that we work with. So there are co-benefits of energy transition. I think I'm going to hand it over to Heidi right now, who is the bigger expert than I on this on these next few slides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we noticed an interesting trend in the Pinelands that there's actually been a decrease in withdrawals from our aquifer, and it seems to be related to our transition from coal. Remember, we are not burning that anymore, and most of that power generation has now transitioned from natural gas, which means that less water is being withdrawn to run those power plants. In the next slide. Overall decrease. And so we see a big difference in how much water each power plant uses. I wasn't able to find a nice graphic that also included wind, but that's also on par with solar. I've also seen some numbers where solar maybe has a little, but then wind is still zero. So they are negligible when you compare to natural gas, nuclear, and coal. Although a side note for the Pinelands is that the nuclear plants that are in New Jersey are mostly withdrawing brackish water. So they are not taking water from the aquifer itself, they're taking it from the nearby estuaries. So although they do use more water, it's not really impacting the aquifer in the same way. However, as we continue our energy transition towards solar and wind, this will continue to have more co-benefits for the aquifer. We'll continue, hopefully, to see a decline in how much is withdrawn. Next. Okay, and then the community solar program has also had the unintended benefit to the Pinelands. So community solar is an attempt to expand solar to residents that don't have rooftops or maybe don't have the funds to be able to take advantage of cheap power from solar systems. So maybe they're renters, maybe they have a weird metal roof like my neighbors. Just something, or they're just covered in trees. Trees are also great, but sometimes they just don't go well with your ambitions to have a solar system in. So for people that aren't able to install their own solar system, they can become subscribers to a community solar program. And this has spurred investment in over 500 megawatts and has been serving 28,000 and now growing subscribers. And you can see in this map on the right all the locations for community solar around New Jersey. And as we zoom into the Pinelands, you can see, I want to draw your attention to all of these orange sites. So in the Pinelands, you can only do ground-mounted solar if it's on a landfill or mining site, someplace that's already been substantially disturbed. If you want to put it on your roof or like over a parking lot, no problem. But if you are just going to put it on the ground, which seems to be preferred for developers just as a simple, no existing structures to deal with, then you can only do it in a landfill or mining site. And this has incentivized many Pinelands towns to finally cap their landfills. So these are landfills that haven't been receiving waste for decades now, but they just haven't gotten around to that part of their to-do list of finally capping their landfill. But that's kind of caused some problems for wildlife that are now learning how to live within the exposed waste, and it's just not a good situation. So we will all benefit from having those landfills finally covered and now capped with solar panels. And even though there's been negative news about the federal incentives, we continue to hear that more community solar projects are on the way. And there were 2 laws signed last week that will continue to expand the program.
So meanwhile, in Washington, 3 years ago, the Inflation Reduction Act had many incentives for consumers, for businesses to try to develop green technologies, to adopt them. There was $369 billion in there, tax credits, rebates for solar, wind, geothermal, battery storage, with a goal toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by the year 2030. The clock turns, as does our slide, to the Budget Reconciliation Act from just earlier this year, even literally just a couple months ago. That put the kibosh on a lot of that funding, if not all of it, for advanced energy technology. That was included in the Inflation Reduction Act and the 2021 Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So it's, from our perspective, a real unfortunate development. This slide might be too small to see. Again, when the slides are available, you can check on this link and look at the table to see. But even what I hope you can see is this, with the exception of the very last item for one of the tax incentives, they all expire by the end of this year, and that was part of the Reconciliation Act. So if you're interested in buying heat pumps or electric vehicles, now is the time to try to take advantage of the tax incentives that were built into the previous federal laws.
Perfect. Right at 12:30. Break for questions before we move on to adaptation.
Yeah, if anyone has questions in the chat, you can put them there. And then we can call your name.
Also, in previous webinars, we had people who were having trouble using the chat at all. So please email us after the fact to let us know. We're still trying to figure out what was going on there.
And we'll put in a credit where credit is due at the end of the presentation, but even just this photograph of one of our little turtle neighbors here in the Pinelands, just really, wonderful work done by photographers here in the Pines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks like Henry and Ed are typing questions, so I'll just give it a second.
Mm-hmm. So Mike, I've been seeing conflicting reports of so wind and solar will continue to grow despite this, mainly with the main benefit of that they're cheap still, and that they're just really fast to bring online. Like you can have your power within a year versus decades for a new nuclear plant. But then heard on NPR this morning about one solar company that is basically shuttering its doors that had been leasing solar panels.
Well, that's the difference between you listening to NPR and my reading the Wall Street Journal. I listen to NPR too. I love NPR. But yeah, there was a report, and I think it's in some of the later slides, where the business decision for renewables just makes a lot of sense, even without the federal incentives. Wind and solar or certainly solar, can be built faster. I think even wind compared to a natural gas generating plant. So it's not even necessarily a business that is interested in green technology or an environmentally oriented business. It just is just good business sense. You get a bigger bang for your buck and for your investment through these newer technologies.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Henry. It says, on slide 19 regarding greenhouse gases, were the non-CO2 percentages in terms of CO2 equivalents?
That is a sophisticated question.
Yeah, I believe they would be, because otherwise it's just a meaningless pie chart.
Let me see if this is the one. Is that the right one?
Slide 19? Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other
We
question
will assume
was,
it is, and we'll issue a correction if it's not.
okay.
Yeah.
And then Ed asked, he said, what a fantastic presentation. Are you also advocating for balcony solar?
I'd never heard of that, but I just Googled that, and that is very cool. So I'm assuming that that would be an option for renters. But yeah, anything that's like attached to a structure, especially if it's already something that's already developed, like I would love to see every parking lot covered with solar panels.
Mhm.
We would definitely advocate for that too.
Yeah, and I heard about it on NPR. The problem with it is just that it's such a new technology, it's unregulated. So I think even sister states of ours like California that would be in favor of it are just, they don't know what the dangers might be. I don't think it's like having a gas grill on your balcony. I don't think it proposes that kind of danger. But I think even with lithium batteries that set on fire for when you think you're doing the right thing with an electric bike, I think maybe that's what's on regulators' minds. But it's a fascinating technology. It's so new. I think we're trying to figure it out. And I think if it's safe to use, I would venture to say it'll certainly get the attention of the state legislature and some legislation we can get behind. Thank you, Ed.
Awesome. Thank you.
Utah is heard from. Excellent.
Well, that's all our questions if you want to keep going.
Okay, let me get to where I was. Let me find the turtle. Fear the turtle. Fear the turtle. I've been told the spirit, and my spirit animal is a turtle. All right, so ta-da. Ta-da. All right, so we did mitigation. How do we live in a leaky house with an umbrella over our head? How do I get to the next slide is a more important question. All right, again, fancy dancy slides brought to you by Dr. Heidi Ye. So there is, again, from our wonderful scientists at Rutgers, keeping a close eye on New Jersey's coastline, there is an estimate of sea level rise somewhere between 5 feet by the year 2100. I'm sorry if this map is too small to see, but I'll talk about where we got the map in a second. Here's 1 second later. The Murphy administration through the Department of Environmental Protection has put forward regulations to try to, if we can't stop the sea from rising, but what can we do to keep people safe? As a result, if I remember correctly, New Jersey's got 117 miles of coast or 121 miles. So those are the names of the overarching program, the protecting against climate threats, the resilient environments and landscapes are the real rules as we've called them. A red arrow that leads to this, the updates to the inundation risk zones. What is an IRZ, you would say? Well, it's the space in between the current shoreline and where we think the future shoreline is going to be. The real rules were proposed by the Department of Environmental Protection last August under the Administrative Procedures Act. It's got a year to adopt it. What it chose to do under, let me just say, lobbying by the business community, the builders community, there's some question about the science behind the estimate in sea level rise. We at PPA think it should, if we're going to have rules, they ought to be based on not just the most current science, but the plus or minus that, as all good scientists would have a statistical range. Why wouldn't you prepare for the worst case scenario, or at least a bad case scenario?
They were already using one of the lower, like, conservative estimates.
Yeah, I looked again this morning to refresh my memory. I mean, it could be as high as 8 feet by the year 2100, even higher than that. But a lot of that has got to do with the issues we already talked about. How do you, if you've got policies in place to mitigate climate change, that might, if you can stop temperatures from rising, which in turn keeps the polar ice caps from melting as quickly as they are, maybe that keeps the sea level from rising as fast as it is now. In just the last 7 months, a lot of the very hopeful policies we thought were in place that would make a change over the next several years, if those are now eliminated, it's a really great case study of government and policies not keeping up with science and reality. But in any case, with all the good intentions of the current administration to try to keep people safe, sea level is going to rise. And it's not the sea level rise, it's what the floods are going to look like when hurricanes come and push all of that increased sea water onto the shoreline. And I do give, these slides are just blatantly stolen from the Department of Environmental Protection. They do have a very helpful website on the real rules. And just to go through this quickly, I'm just going to press the button real quick and you can see where the sea level rise is now in the current shoreline. This is what it looks like at 5 feet. And then layer on top of that the current flood elevation and what the future flood elevation could be. So the real rules as they stand now, there's actually, we'll put some information out with help from Rachel and the great staff here at PPA. There's a public hearing coming up in early September from DEP to address the amendments that they've already proposed to the real rules. One of those amendments is to decrease the estimate of sea level rise from 5 feet to 4 feet. It's not a perfect world. 4 feet is still better than 3. And there's some other really good things in the real rules, and I don't want to overlook those. And one of those really good things in the real rules are incentives to facilitate nature-based solutions. And one of those, I hope the picture looks as good for you as it did when I ran across it the first time. These really imaginative, giant, bricks is not a good enough word for it, but these really huge cages filled with oyster and clam shells, whelk shells that would otherwise just go to waste, putting them together and making artificial reefs to try to mitigate the results of sea level rise. And what does that have to do with the Pinelands? A lot of you sophisticated members of PPA know already that there's a slight difference between the state designation and the federal designation of the Pinelands. It arguably goes all the way out to the coastline. But even that detail notwithstanding, there is a great connection between sea level rise and the Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer. And because it's science and not policy, I'm going to make Heidi talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So hit the slide. So we've got our unconfined aquifer of the Kirkwood-Cohansey. Think of South Jersey as just a big bucket of sand, and water can move quite freely through it. So any contamination that occurs at the surface can reach down below, and then any intrusion of the salt water from down below will also impact the water at the surface. And so we can see in this little image here on the right that as it's also exacerbated by humans, as we're withdrawing more water from the aquifer, that just creates a vacuum that is sucking in the salt water from the ocean. And we can see that, wells that are closest to the coastline will be the literal canaries in the coal mine, that those will be affected by the salt first. And we'll continue to see impacts to further inland communities, even if the ocean visually looks like it's still very far away. Next. And then this has a very visible impact on our ecology as well. So the Atlantic white cedars that are very iconic to the Pinelands, they are very sensitive to salt water, and they also like to sit, like Jen, our science director, she says that they like to have their feet wet. So they are already living at this very specific elevation where they like to have some moisture, but then a little too much, and then they'll flood and they die. So that's created, if you've ever seen these forests along the coastline, the ghost forests, those are probably Atlantic white cedar. They're really resistant to um, rotting. So that's why they are able to just stand there like these ghostly pillars for centuries after they've died. And then our friend Dr. Isaacson, who studied these populations for years, he estimates that between 2,100 and 3,000 acres of dead forest like this can be found in New Jersey. Much of it caused by the saltwater intrusion. Sometimes beavers too, but mostly the saltwater. Next, Mike.
I'm trying.
Mhm.
There. Ooh, I'm sorry. Is that the next one? Yeah.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
okay.
Maybe I should take this one too. Okay, so
Please, it's science too.
yeah, extreme heat is also a consequence of climate change that we need to prepare for. And one of the things, especially when we're living in more developed areas, we need to be sensitive to the urban heat island effect. Next. And so one tangible way that we can reduce the urban heat island effect, where you have cities are hotter than natural areas that have lots of grass and trees and all that, is that we reduce our surfaces that have asphalt, because everyone intuitively knows that asphalt is much hotter. It has a lower albedo. It's reflecting less of the sunlight. It's absorbing more of it. And sorry, you can hit the slide again. But little known fact that artificial turf is basically on par with asphalt in terms of its thermal properties. And so both artificial turf and asphalt can be up to 72 degrees hotter than natural grass on a sunny day. And I'll send the link to that study later on, and hit the slide. And I also as we've been advocating against artificial turf, we did a whole webinar on it that you can already see on our YouTube channel. Okay, back to you, Mike.
Yeah, and there's legislation that would prohibit the use of green acres funding at the state level from being used to install artificial turf. Heidi's been a great advocate for that. We've been working very closely with the Sierra Club on that legislation. I think it's part of the way through the legislature, but we'll talk more about New Jersey politics in a few slides. You've all seen too, so there's extreme heat. We also have these crazy huge storms that are really just flooding the Pinelands. This is a great cross section of what a rain garden looks like. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, so we view rain gardens as a solution to many problems. So when you're using native vegetation, you're able to use less water. You're not purposefully irrigating these plants nearly as much, but you're still getting a really beautiful garden from it. But then when you create this depression to create the rain garden, and you have water from your roof run into it, it will collect it and hold it there instead of just shooting it directly into the gutter, and usually goes untreated or minimally treated into the nearest water body. But that causes a lot of flooding downstream. So we view rain gardens as a great way to kind of restore the natural hydrology that existed on your property before you put a house there. So we have, if you go next, we have our landscape makeover program. And we did a webinar on this previously. So Stephen Elliott, he presented on Our Land, Our Water, the connection between those two things, and all of the science leading up to why rain gardens and everything else that we do through the landscape makeover program is so beneficial. Next. Back to you.
So there's these increased storms and the drought that we all remember from not that long ago. We here at Pinelands Preservation Alliance are very, very proud of our Rancocas Creek Farm. It's 72 acres. A phrase I did not know before I worked here: regenerative agriculture, which is the efficient use of water. It captures stormwater. You can see just how happy our farmers are, and the abundance of fantastic output from the farm, and that really stark photo, contrast to what the land used to look like before we started. It's always been a farm here at the Bishop Farmstead since the 1700s, but this incredibly smarter use of the land is really a sight to see. Anything more to say about that?
Well, in October, our webinar will be on regenerative agriculture and the work that we've been doing at Rancocas Creek Farm. So we'll be presenting the whole story of that and some of the science of it too.
Farmer Jeff. So we can't talk about the effect of climate change on the Pinelands without talking about fires. If we can't stop climate change from happening, what mitigation can we take? Prescribed burns can try to get ahead of raging, out of control wildfires. There is a legislation that we advocated for back in, that was enacted in 2018, that supports more prescribed burns, smartly, strategically done in all the forests of New Jersey, including the Pinelands. It's going to reduce wildfire risk and sustain the natural ecology. It's maybe not exactly what you would think. You would think fire is bad. Forests need the natural occurring cycle of fires actually regenerates the growth of a forest. But we also need to protect the carbon that's under the ground, and Heidi is more expert than I, so let me hand it off to her again.
Yeah, so I like this image here because it shows, if you hit that slide, if you're looking at these different ecosystems, boreal forest, tropical forest, seagrass, salt marsh, mangrove, so both on land and in the water, when you compare how much carbon is stored in the soil versus the biomass, that's like the trees, the things that you can see above the surface. Hit the slide again. Oh, I thought that I had a little image that would circle. So anyways, you can see that the majority of the carbon is actually under the surface, and not in those trees that we see above the ground. So there's a lot of unseen benefit to protecting these ecosystems, but it also kind of demonstrates how with our farm and the practices that we are practicing at Rancocas Creek Farm, that by building up our soil, encouraging deep root growth, which doesn't happen on the typical farm, that we are also boosting the carbon storage that can happen on that kind of land. Okay, back to you, Mike.
All right, sorry for my sticky computer buttons here. So Heidi and I wanted to try to have some hope at the end of all this. Climate change is scary, it's severe, it's the politics of all this are pretty fraught. So just, reading everything I can, I saw this, what I saw as a hopeful perspective from the Natural Resources Defense Council, from their president, that whatever's happening at the federal level with the U.S. government, he points out that the United States is larger than just what's happening in Washington, D.C., and the world itself is much larger than our country alone. Gene Karpinski, who just retired from the presidency of the League of Conservation Voters, the New Jersey chapter, NJLCV, is a terrific partner of ours. And you can see since 2017, as a demarcation point of the first Trump administration, if the federal government can't be a good partner or a reliable partner on these issues, you go back to the states. And he pointed out that there's now 40% of the country lives in a state with goals of 100% clean energy. And my buttons are sticky again. So the work we do here at PPA, let me just point out quickly an effort we were not part of, but there's class action lawsuits that can try to forestall what some of the policies that the Trump administration is pursuing. There's some victories once in a while, up to and including just a couple of weeks ago. Here at the state level, and we've had some town hall meetings on the Green Amendment. I'm going right after our presentation here today. I'm going to head down to Atlantic City for a rally in support of the Climate Superfund Act. No need to get into the details of those right now, but if you're interested in more, we can certainly give you information, but we'll be talking about both of those issues going forward. So finally, what can you do? You can be an informed voter. You can, and a citizen of the great state of New Jersey. We and Virginia are the only two states this year with gubernatorial and legislative elections. They're going to be incredibly important for the policies going forward. Energy is already an issue that's being debated by the two candidates, Mikey Sherrill, the Democratic nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, the Republican. So we will be doing the best we can to get information out there. I picked 1, 2, 3, 4 news websites that if they don't already, I'm sure they will have voter guides on a daily basis. They do a very good job of reporting what's happening. So I recommend those to you. I will put in a shameless plug for our own political action organization, the Pinelands Action Campaign. We hope to do some forums with the candidates from both legislative districts 8 and 9, which cover Burlington County and some of the other areas within the Pinelands. So stay tuned for those. And with 5 minutes to spare, let me just say that, again, a great thanks to the photographers and the other sources of the graphics and photos we used throughout the presentation. I'll let Heidi talk a little bit more about the next episode of our very exciting webinar series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so next month we'll have Sean Kane-Hollins, who will talk about Access Nature, the story of how that came to be and how disability access to natural spaces has spread across the state, with PPA taking the charge of this movement. So join us a month from now to hear more about that.
Which gives me a chance to, there was something I meant to say a little earlier, just with regard to what you all can do and why this upcoming state election is so important. The Pinelands Commission, which governs the comprehensive management plan for the Pinelands, there are 15 members of the commission. The governor appoints half of them. And there are still there's a very glaring empty seat that we are trying to get filled by the best person that we can advocate for, and trying to get that person appointed before Governor Murphy is out of office. So you might not think that your vote counts for something as huge as climate change.